The Global Media Monitoring Project is an initiative that runs every 5 years. So every 5 years they take a snapshot of the representation of women across different media outlets, including TV, radio, websites, and so on. So it's a way of measuring to what extent or how far women are represented in the media.
Well, we saw some of those figures and they weren't as high as we would like to have seen them. What can you tell us about that?
Well, for example, one of the key statistics from from 2025 project was how, although women make up half the world's population, in some countries they actually make up 51% of the population, in actual fact, women only feature 25% in the media. So you have half of the population only being represented 25% of the time.
And do we understand why that is?
This is a global figure, and I suppose for a more nuanced, detailed analysis, the Global Media Monitoring Project also carries out a report per country. So you'd be able to get a better insight into which countries are doing better than others, but those are the global figures that they have.
But both figures, in terms of how visible they are and how, what capacity they're in, way below men.
Yes, so for example, when it comes to personal experience, the representation of women is higher. However, when it comes to sort of featuring women as experts or commentators, that figure is dramatically lower. So I think, and there's also a piece of data that was interesting where if a woman was to interview somebody, women would appear, say, 24% of the time, I think it was, whereas if the reporter was a man, that number would be even lower. So I think the project tells us something about gender bias and the perception of women. And I think the media plays an important role in communicating the diversity of the community that it represents. So I think that's part of the conversation we had today.
Yeah, actually that was going to be my next question, is that why does diversity matter in media representation?
I think diversity matters all the time. Because if you're a business and organization and you don't have diverse perspectives, whether it's to do with race or age or whatever the issue may be, there's a bit of information that's missing. And whatever initiative or program you're running or business you're running, you'll be lacking some information. So I think that it's always important, and I think that any media outlet plays an important part in communicating what is important. So I think we have to reflect the diversity of the community that we live in so that everybody has that sense of belonging and that we have that sense of inclusion.
It's interesting because at GBC we've said that it's difficult getting female commentators and experts on our programmes, radio and television. And that was actually reflected in some of the figures that you brought to us.
I think it's difficult. We're a small community. Some people are naturally reluctant to appear on the news or on TV or take part in a program. So there's that perhaps hesitancy. I think that I would just encourage perhaps GBC and any other news media outlet to consider how can we make it more comfortable for certain groups of people to take part. And that could be a whole host of things that each organisation can reflect upon, but perhaps having an open day where people perhaps could have like a mock interview perhaps as well. So I think there's different steps that can be taken to make people feel more comfortable in a space. For example, I've been to Gibraltar Today programme a few times, but I haven't been in the rest of the building, so I was able to see one of the sets today. And I think just being comfortable in the physical space is quite empowering, and I think that many people don't often get the chance to be in this space.
Let me just ask about women in sports, because we've definitely seen a shift towards greater reporting of female sports, and how important is that?
I think it's important. We've seen, for example, with the women's UK national team, I think there was great excitement about their results. I think there was a great sort of buzz around that team. They did very well. And I think, perhaps in the past we might have heard comments like, oh, women's sports won't fill stadiums, but they do, and they have, and that's been proven. So I think we're beginning to see that women's sports are also financially viable. There was a big question mark over that in the past. And I think that women do want to attend big sporting events where women are featured, and I think that is changing. I do still think that perhaps a lot of attention is still given to male sportsmen, but I think that each organisation, each association, sporting association, should try and make sure that any communication they have about their athletes is as gender balanced as possible.
So my questions have been more about women in the news, how visible they are and how they're represented, but it's about diversity in general, isn't it?
I think so. I think that we live in a community which is quite diverse. We talk about Gibraltar being sort of a cultural hotspot and so on, and I think that it's important to reflect the diversity that exists in Gibraltar, and I think that from the Ministry of Equality we're always very keen to promote diversity and inclusion, and we work with many different demographics across the year. So in October we'll be marking International Day of Older Persons, we have International Men's Day in November, we have the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on the 25th of November, International Women's Day in March. So we try to work with many different demographics, and we try to support as many people across the community.
And finally, Mind Your Language. I know it was a programme from the 70s, a sitcom, but it's so important as well, isn't it, today?
Yeah, I think that people need to be aware of the impact of the language that they choose to use, and that they are going to be held accountable for any language that has a negative impact. And I know that some people say, oh, it's just banter, oh, I didn't mean it, but that won't detract from the impact, the negative impact it might have on somebody. We also, I think, have to be mindful that language around, for example, disability has evolved, has changed, and so some of the terms that are also to do with gender equality are constantly evolving and changing. So I think it's a question of keeping an open mind, learning a little, and I think that that's all that we can encourage people to do.